I never imagined my life would turn out like this. Part of me still feels as if I'm living in someone else's story. 4 years ago, I lost my wife, Anna, in a tragic car accident. She was only 26 at the time, and so was I. We had been married for 6 years, a time that included some truly beautiful moments, but also, in the end, a bleak period of conflict and deep unhappiness. Ironically, it was only after her death that I realized just how complicated our relationship had become. And now, 4 years later, even though life has moved forward in many ways, I'm facing a conundrum. Should I finally break my silence about what really happened behind closed doors, or keep pretending she was some flawless angel? Anna and I had known each other since we were teenagers, though we didn't start dating until our early 20s. We were that couple everyone thought was perfect for each other, both driven, close to our families, and, at least on the surface, deeply in love. When we first got married, I genuinely believed we could face any obstacle together. She seemed to feel the same. We'd dreamed of starting a family someday, though that never came to pass, and living one of those storybook existences that you see in romantic films. But in the months leading up to her death, things had changed. The closeness we once shared was replaced by secrecy and jealousy, mostly on Anna's part. She became extremely protective of her phone, to the point that she would freak out if I even glanced in its direction. That was unusual because early on in our marriage, we didn't even have passcodes or any barriers. If she wanted to borrow my phone, she just grabbed it, and vice versa. We had nothing to hide. Yet suddenly, she started changing her phone's password regularly, and if I asked her about it, she'd accuse me of not trusting her. At the same time, she was constantly hovering over mine, just checking, as if she expected to find something incriminating. It was infuriating, and it created a wedge between us. We argued often, and I felt like I was losing my best friend. I told myself it was just a rough patch. Maybe we needed a weekend away or some counseling. But any suggestion of counseling made her bristle. She'd say, "We're fine. We don't need to air our dirty laundry in front of a stranger." I didn't know how to reach her, so I tried to be patient. Then tragedy struck. In a single moment, she was gone, killed by a driver who lost control of his car. She'd been out that day running errands, and my final memory was a text I'd sent her asking if she needed me to pick up dinner. She never answered. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I should have tried calling her instead of texting, or if any tiny change might have shifted events so that she wouldn't have been on that street at that moment. Guilt and helplessness swirled inside me for months after her funeral. In the immediate aftermath of Anna's death, her family and friends rallied around me. I was treated almost like a widower in an old-fashioned drama. Her mother, my mother-in-law, wept on my shoulder, telling me how Anna had adored me and that we were the perfect couple. Her father was more reserved, but he offered quiet support and practical help. Her older brother, Thomas, who was 30 at the time, became my rock. We were close before, but after losing Anna, he and I formed an even stronger bond, one that felt like brotherhood. I think we both needed that connection to deal with our grief. However, within weeks, something unexpected happened that changed the way I saw everything. I tested positive for an STD. I remember the shock like it was yesterday. I initially thought there was some lab mix-up. It felt impossible that I could have contracted anything, because I hadn't been with anyone else, ever really, aside from Anna. But the doctors confirmed it was real, and that meant Anna must have contracted it from someone else. My mind reeled at the betrayal. All the secrecy, the jealousy, and her obsession with my phone suddenly clicked into place. She had been projecting her own guilt onto me. When I looked into her phone and laptop, I half hoped I wouldn't find anything. Maybe there was some bizarre explanation. Yet the moment I started digging, it was like a dark curtain pulled back. I discovered a series of messages from a guy we went to college with. Someone who'd been a casual friend, or so I thought. He'd written to her after her death, not knowing she was gone. His messages asked her to send pictures from their last encounter and referenced a time they'd been together recently. He sounded cocky, like this was a normal routine for them. My stomach twisted with every word I read. I managed to get into her phone because, ironically, she never changed her Apple ID password, I guess she assumed I'd never bother, and from there, I accessed some of her messages and files that synced to her laptop. Most of it was wiped clean, deleted, or hidden, but a few messages had timestamps after she died, so she never got to erase them. That's how I saw at least a sliver of the truth. I found pictures of her and this guy in a random folder labeled Cute Puppies, probably to avoid suspicion. Some of the photos were explicit, but even the regular ones, like them together in a car or kissing in what looked like a dimly lit room, made my heart drop. In one photo, Anna had short hair. She only wore it that way for a few months right after our engagement, which told me this affair, or one of the affairs, had lasted at least 3 years, half of our marriage. I also found pictures of 2 other men, though I had no clue who they were, and there were no corresponding messages or names that I recognized. My mind spun with questions. How long had this been going on? How could she look at me every day and pretend nothing was wrong? I reached out to the college friend to confront him, telling him I knew everything, including the fact that I had an STD. I didn't threaten him exactly, but I made it clear that if he ever spoke about this publicly, I'd make sure everyone knew the truth. He claimed only his ex-girlfriend was aware of the situation and that he'd ask her to keep quiet. I told him I wanted it to stay a secret forever. I didn't want to deal with the fallout, especially while mourning Anna in front of her friends and family. Believe it or not, I decided right then to keep all this hidden from her family. Why? Because I knew how deeply they loved her. I could see how shattered they already were by her sudden death, and I didn't want to be the one to desecrate her memory. Even though I felt furious, betrayed, and devastated, I also saw the grief in her parents' eyes, in her sister's tears, and in the heartfelt eulogies her friends delivered. They saw her as a bright light, a caring soul. I figured telling them the truth wouldn't bring her back, and it would only cause them more pain. Perhaps this was my way of protecting them, and, in a twisted sense, protecting my own illusions of the good times we'd shared before things went sour. 2 years passed in a haze of grief and confusion. It was a lonely time, though I still saw Anna's family often. Her mother and sister would invite me over for dinners. They'd talk about Anna for hours, sometimes making me the center of attention by asking me to reminisce. Oh, Anna was such a great cook, right? Remember how the 2 of you would banter about who had better taste in music? If I tried to change the subject, they'd look hurt. Early on, I used my grief as a shield, claiming it was too painful to talk about her. But after a certain point, that wore thin. They expected me to keep her memory alive as vividly as they did. They wanted me to confirm their stories of her as an amazing, perfect wife. Thomas was the one person I felt comfortable around. He never forced me to talk about Anna if I didn't want to. He sensed something was off about our marriage before she died, but we'd never gone into detail. I think he just attributed it to normal marital ups and downs. The rest of Anna's family, especially her mom and sister, seemed to hover, wanting me to be a permanent pillar of her memory. It was draining. I loved her father, who was calm and supportive, and as time went on, we formed a friendship around our shared field of work. He would call me son, which oddly comforted me, though it also made me feel guilty for keeping such a massive secret about his real daughter. Sometimes I wondered if maybe I should unburden myself. But then, I'd see how at peace he was thinking Anna had been wonderful, and I'd pull back. Why tarnish her image when it couldn't fix anything? Eventually, though, I reached a point where I felt ready to move on romantically. It had been 2 years since her death. My grief had shifted from an all-consuming monster to a background ache that flared up now and then. That's when Thomas told me he wanted to introduce me to someone special. He emphasized that I should be certain I was ready for a serious relationship because, from his perspective, this woman was the real deal. I trusted him, and I agreed to meet her. This woman was Laura, Thomas's sister-in-law, his wife's younger sister. I'd known of Laura peripherally at family gatherings, but had never really talked to her. She was 25 when we went on our first date. From the moment we sat down in a small cafe, I was captivated by her energy. She had this blend of kindness and wit that put me at ease instantly. We laughed about random things, from the weird decor on the walls to silly pop songs that were playing in the background. I felt a spark that I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. Within a few months, we were exchanging "I love you" and talking about the future. It felt fast, but also completely natural. I'd never hidden my past from Laura. On one of our earlier dates, I told her about Anna, that I was a widower, that it had been hard, but I didn't go into the cheating. It took me a bit longer to open up about that, to trust that Laura could handle it without changing how she saw me or how she saw my late wife. Eventually, though, my internal conflict bubbled up, and I needed her to understand why I was so cagey whenever Anna's name came up in front of her family. So I told Laura everything, showed her the evidence on my computer, the messages, the pictures, the timelines that made it clear Anna had been seeing multiple men behind my back. Laura cried for me, outraged on my behalf. Then she comforted me, assuring me that none of it was my fault, that I had every right to feel betrayed. After that, our relationship actually grew stronger. Laura and I understood each other on a deeper level. She appreciated my honesty, and I appreciated her warmth and lack of judgment. We started to talk about marriage. This time, it felt radically different. There was no secrecy, no sense of dread. It was just love. By the time we'd been dating for a little under 2 years, I proposed, and she said yes. I've never been happier. That brings me to the present conundrum. Anna's mom and sister, and some of her friends, hate seeing me move on. They grew used to the idea that I'd be the forever grieving widow, devoted to cherishing Anna's memory. But that's never who I truly was. I just pretended for their sake. And now that I'm with Laura, they feel slighted. They'll make passive-aggressive comments, roll their eyes if I show Laura affection, and sometimes even scold me for disrespecting Anna's memory. It's incredibly uncomfortable. Anna's sister once snapped that it's obvious I never really loved Anna at all, because if I did, how could I be with someone else just 4 years after her death? She later apologized in front of everyone, but it was clear she still believed it on some level. Her mother has also made it plain that she thinks I'm moving too quickly, which is ludicrous if you consider how much time has passed. It's not just me affected by this. Laura feels it too. Whenever we're at a family gathering, like a birthday party for Thomas or some holiday event, we have to tiptoe around Anna's sister and mother. Once, her mom actually came up to us while we were dancing and asked us to stop because it was making her sad. She claimed it reminded her of Anna, who loved to dance. Laura and I left the event early, both of us feeling angry and humiliated. Later, her mother called my mother and Laura's parents, complaining that we were disrespecting her grief by being too affectionate. But it's not just the older generation. Some of Anna's friends have turned cold. They organize yearly reunions around her birthday, which is always fraught for me. I go because I know how much she meant to them. But I also know that one of her affair partners is usually there. It's a big enough group that I can avoid him, but it's an added layer of stress. Laura usually accompanies me if she can, but then she gets the stink eye from certain people who act like she's intruding. It's draining, and I'm sick of the charade. I keep thinking about how easy it would be to just drop the bomb, to gather her family and say, "Look, Anna cheated on me for years, gave me an STD, and shattered our marriage in secret. You're all acting like I'm heartless for moving on, but you have no clue the pain she caused me before she died." Just the thought of it fills me with a grim sense of relief. I imagine them finally leaving me alone, or at least understanding why I'm not keen to reminisce about her good old days. But I also know it would devastate them. Anna's father especially might never recover from that shock. Thomas might feel betrayed if I told everyone without telling him first. Her mother would be crushed. Maybe it's selfish to think about revealing her secret, or maybe it's self-protection. I can't decide which. The worst part is seeing how it impacts Laura. She's never done anything wrong. She met me after Anna's passing. She never stole me from anyone. Yet she's the one who gets side-eyed and criticized. It got to the point where I couldn't even say, "I love you?" in front of certain people without them acting like I'd stomped on Anna's grave. How is that fair? I thought that with time the family's grief would soften and they'd be happy for me. But some of them can't seem to let go of the idea that I owe eternal devotion to Anna's memory. Eventually, the pressure built to a boiling point. I started entertaining the idea seriously. Maybe I needed to confide in Thomas, my closest ally in Anna's family, and see how he felt. He's not just my ex-brother-in-law. He's one of my best friends, practically a brother. After all, he's the reason I met Laura in the first place. He introduced us, believing we'd be a great match, and he was right. But the rest of his family is making my life hell because they don't understand why I'm not as reverent toward Anna's memory as they are. So, I reached out to Thomas and asked if we could talk privately, away from everyone else. Laura and I drove to his house, where he and his wife, Laura's sister, sat down with us in their living room. I felt my pulse racing. This was a moment I'd envisioned 100 times. Do I finally reveal what Anna did? I started by explaining how I'd been feeling for years, how her mother, her sister, and some of her close friends wanted me to play a role, Anna's eternally grieving husband that I couldn't play anymore, how it was hurting Laura, driving a wedge between her and some people she cared about, and how I'd reached my limit. I made it clear that I was about to share something painful, and that if anyone didn't want to hear it, they could walk away now. Thomas's wife had tears in her eyes already, perhaps guessing something was seriously wrong. Thomas looked concerned, but told me to continue. I told them the story of how I discovered Anna's infidelity, about the STD, the phone, the laptop, the pictures of her with multiple men, how it had been going on for years, likely half our marriage. I explained my initial decision to keep it secret to preserve their happy memories of her. At some point, I stopped and let them absorb it. Thomas stared at the floor, brows furrowed. His wife, Monica, was already crying, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. Thomas asked if I had proof, and I hesitated, warning that the images were graphic, not something he'd really want to see. He suggested maybe Monica should verify it, and he'd trust her word. So I reluctantly showed her a few of the photos. She flinched as she scrolled through them, some part of her horrified that she recognized her late sister in these very intimate images. Thomas muttered a string of curses under his breath. He stood up, paced around the room, and then spat out, "Why was she so fucking stupid?" over and over. I couldn't tell if he was angry at Anna for being unfaithful, or at me for telling him, or at the universe for upending his rosy image of his sister. For a second, I regretted saying anything, but there was no going back. He stepped out for about an hour. Monica stayed behind, hugging Laura and quietly sobbing. Laura looked at me as if to say, "It'll be okay." I felt numb, like I'd just unleashed a secret that might blow apart this entire family dynamic. Eventually, Thomas returned. He walked in, looked me in the eyes, and gave me a hug. I hugged him back, relieved, but still uncertain of what he was thinking. He took a deep breath and said, "So, what do you want to do?" I told him I just wanted to move on with my life, free from the constant guilt trips and unrealistic expectations that I publicly revere Anna. I told him I loved their family, but it was getting unbearable. He nodded and said he understood. He promised he would take care of it, that I shouldn't have to confront his mother or sister about it. Then he insisted we remain brothers. He reminded me that none of this changed our bond. We all ended up hugging, even Monica, who kept crying and muttering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." In the days that followed, I learned that Monica had known Anna was cheating, though she didn't realize how extensive it was. She told me that about a year before Anna died, Anna had confessed some affair to her, saying she was going to come clean and work on the marriage. Monica assumed Anna did that. Now, realizing her sister never did, she felt betrayed herself. She told me she was prepared to help me handle any fallout. As for Thomas, he asked me if his father could remain in the dark. I agreed. The last thing I wanted was to devastate a grieving father who idolized his daughter's memory. We mutually decided not to burden him with the truth. Thomas also said he'd keep his mother from bothering me and Laura. I still worry what exactly he'll tell her, if anything, but he insisted I not concern myself with that. A few weeks later, The tension started to lift. Laura and I have distanced ourselves from many of Anna's old friends, and from her mother, who hasn't spoken to me directly in a while. Sometimes I hear secondhand that she's still upset, but if she tries to call me, I don't pick up. I leave that to Thomas to handle. My ex-father-in-law, Anna's dad, remains friendly with me. We'll go fishing or golfing now and then, along with my future father-in-law, Laura's dad. It sounds messy on paper, but it's actually quite natural in practice. We don't mention Anna, and he seems content to have me in his life as an unofficial son. As for Laura, we've decided to speed up our wedding plans. Why wait? We love each other, and there's no point dragging out an engagement just to satisfy the expectations of others. We're hoping to get married in March or April, depending on venue availability. Some people might say it's too soon or too fast, but it's been 4 years since Anna passed, 2 since Laura and I started dating, and we're both sure of what we want. Besides, both of our families, mine and Laura's, are supportive, save for a few holdouts who are still clinging to the memory of Anna as if that should dictate my life forever. That's not to say it's been easy. Sometimes I feel a pang of guilt thinking about how I've shattered the illusions held by Thomas and Monica. They were just trying to cope with losing a sister. Now they know she was lying to me for years. It must feel like a fresh kind of grief. Learning that the person you loved and mourned wasn't the person you thought she was. There's also a part of me that still feels sorrow for Anna herself, complicated as that is. I know she wasn't a terrible human being all around. She had people who adored her, and she had aspects of her personality that were genuinely wonderful. By her own words, she did love me in some twisted way, but she let her kinks, or desires, or insecurities drive her to cheat. She was selfish, maybe even reckless, but not wholly evil. Sometimes I wish she were still alive just so we could properly confront what happened. But then I think how that confrontation might have ended in a divorce anyway. In the end, I believe telling Thomas was the right decision. It allowed me to lift that weight off my chest. It gave me a chance to protect Laura and myself from the constant criticism and expectation to be in eternal mourning. I didn't have to blow everything up publicly. I just needed someone on the inside who could run interference. And Thomas is that person. Even though he's devastated by the truth about his sister, he respects me for coming to him. He sees how happy Laura and I are together, and he wants to keep his family from causing us more grief. Will I ever tell Anna's mother or father about the affairs? Probably not, unless there comes a day when they directly challenge me or insult Laura in a way that forces my hand. But I hope it never comes to that. Her father is a kind man, and losing Anna so abruptly was devastating enough for him. He doesn't need to know she was unfaithful. It wouldn't bring him peace. And as for her mother, well, she and I aren't close anymore. I suspect she'll remain under the impression that I'm just a cold-hearted widower who moved on too fast. If that's what lets her live each day without collapsing under another wave of heartbreak, so be it. I can't fix her grief, and I'm no longer willing to be a vessel for it. Sometimes I still scroll through old photos on my computer and come across the folder where I stored the evidence. It's not something I enjoy looking at. It's more like a reminder of what I survived, a lesson in what deception can do to a marriage. Part of me wants to delete it all, to free myself from that lingering darkness. Another part of me keeps it, just in case. Maybe that's a testament to how deeply betrayal scars you. Even years later, I'm not fully ready to let go of the proof. But overall, I'm moving forward. I've got a bright future with Laura, someone who loves me openly, honestly, and without secrets. We plan to buy a place of our own soon, possibly have kids in a year or two. Her parents adore me, and my parents adore her. Life, in short, is good. I spent enough years living under the weight of Anna's memory, pretending she was a saint to keep everyone else comfortable. Now it's my turn to be comfortable, to be happy. If that means a few people remain in the dark, or hold misguided opinions of me, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. I did what I had to do to preserve my peace, protect Laura, and maintain my relationship with the people I genuinely care about, Thomas and my ex-father-in-law. So, to answer the big question, would I be the bad person if I told Anna's entire family what happened? Perhaps, but at this point, I don't have to. Telling Thomas was enough. He's my advocate within their circle, ensuring no one tries to bully me or Laura again. If they do, he'll handle it. And if it ever escalates to a point where I must reveal the truth to protect Laura or myself, then I will without hesitation. But until then, I'm content knowing that I'm no longer carrying this secret alone. In the end, I refuse to let Anna's infidelity define the rest of my life. Yes, it shaped a big part of who I am now. It taught me about betrayal, about the resilience it takes to pick yourself up after finding out the person you loved was deceiving you all along. But it also led me, in a roundabout way, to Laura, to genuine love and partnership. I've learned that sometimes you have to set boundaries, speak your truth, and choose your own well-being even if it disrupts the comfortable illusions of others. That's not selfish. That's survival. If Anna were alive today, would I say these things to her face? Probably. Would she realize how badly she hurt me? Possibly. But I'll never know, and I have to live with that uncertainty. That's life, I guess. Messy and unfair. Still, I'm grateful for the love I have now and for the friends and family who support me, warts and all. Letting go of the pretense, or at least sharing it with Thomas, was the first real step in moving forward. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Moving forward into a new chapter, one free from secrets and full of real love.